Action Guide. And in the meantime, I will be introducing the speakers, and today's session, it is about how to cut emissions from companies' transport of goods. And it is based off a guide that we released last year during COP28. It's the Transportation Action Guide, and it's a simple guide, step-by-step approach for how companies can work to reduce their emissions in their value chains coming from transportation, and much built on what you need to do internally and also on the collaboration that is needed to make this happen. And the speakers that we have here today is Elisabeth Munck from IKEA. We have Mohammed Hegazy from Climate Champions team, Martin Andersen from scalable logistics, and myself, Louise Rehbinder from Exponential Roadmap Initiative. I will only be here to introduce the guide and also to moderate this section or this session, but the most interesting part, that is what you will hear from our speakers, of course. So I think I will get going now. Welcome everyone again. And this webinar is about the Transportation Action Guide. We launched it last year, and we really want to make sure that we communicate about this guide, that we spread it, because it's a very simple step-by-step approach where companies can work with their emissions in their value chain coming from transportation. And we have great examples here from IKEA and from Scan Global Logistics for how this can be done, how this has been done, and for things that you need to think about to make this, make it easier for you and your organization with your transportation emissions. But first, I want to give you the agenda. I will be doing a short introduction about the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, because not all of you will have heard of us. So quickly on that, and then I will hand over to Mohammed Hegazy from Climate Champions team, who will talk a little bit about the research that has been made in this area, giving us some information and insights there. Then I will be introducing the guide itself, but very quickly, and then hand over to IKEA and Elisabeth, and then Scan Global Logistics and Martin. Then we will have a short panel discussion, but if we have time, we will also have a Q&A at the end. So please write your questions in the chat. If you have questions, please also state who you are asking the question to, if you're asking some certain person in this call, and we will take them in the end if we have time for that. But I move into the introduction part, and that is about Exponential Roadmap Initiative, the organization that I work for, the organization that is also organizing this webinar and has co-written this guide that we're talking about. We are working with companies, policy and research to drive collaborative climate action and solutions. The narrative we have is to halve emissions by 2030 through exponential climate action and solutions. And it's really two parts. It's really two parts in that statement. The one thing is that we need to reduce emission. The other thing is that in order to reduce emissions, we need to have actions and solutions in place. And that's very much the area where we are working in. And that's getting the right action in place and the right climate solutions so that we can reduce the emissions. And we are working with organizations. We have a group of members and partners that are some of the most ambitious organizations working with climate action. And we're focusing very much on the integration of climate into the business strategies. That is where it belongs. And what we do is anchored in the latest science, and we're also an accredited initiative of the Race to Zero. So that was really quickly about us. Please go into our webpage Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and there you can read a lot about what we do, the guides that we are working on, and the companies and organizations that we're working with. Now I want to hand over to Mohammed, transport lead at the Climate Champions team, talking about emissions landscape from transport of goods. Please, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Louise. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be joining the stage here with the ERI today. And I created a small presentation, if we can move to the next slide, please, where I'm going to provide an overview of transport goods emissions landscape, and also a little bit from the Race to Zero perspective. And maybe if we move to the next slide, in the agenda, basically I wanted to set the scene very quickly. Who are the climate champions? What are we doing? What's our mandate? I'm going to scope the transport emissions, and for that, we're practitioners in the field. We know transport. We know it's 14% of global emissions. We know that electrification is happening, and we see the Teslas and the Polestars and the electric Volvos running around our streets. So I tried to pick the three most interesting, maybe not as well-known parts of the transport emissions science that I really wanted to focus on to guide today's conversation. And this is really entering into some of the regulatory frameworks and standards for decarbonization, closing with the climate solutions that we in the Champions team are pushing forward, and what action we believe you can take on. So moving on, a quick introduction to the high-level champions. Now, after COP28, on the way to COP29, we have Her Excellency Razana Mubarak from the UAE COP presidency. She's the high-level champion and will be giving the mantle to Ms. Nigar Arpadarai at COP29 in Baku. Now, very quick history. It started in Paris. The world finally got together. Sometimes it's weird how late it happened, but it did happen in the end. Agreed we need to fight climate change and limit it well below 2 degrees. Then there was the Marrakesh partnership. The mandate of the high-level champions was reviewed because the parties, the states recognized we can't do it without businesses. And this is when the Race to Zero launched in 2020. And I really appreciate what Louise said earlier about this is where climate action belongs. It belongs with the private sector, with the businesses driving the economies. And in COP26, the global campaigns was also expanded to include resilience, are the key functions of the high-level champions. What does that mean? Next slide, please. Basically, it's a campaign trying to bring in all of the non-state actors, we call them, or basically what is not a state, what are not the member countries at the climate conferences negotiating, but the actual entities, the real economy, we like to call it, that drive climate action. It's cities, it's states and regions. Think in the US when you get a lot of states like California driving climate action even faster than the federal governments. It's companies, it's the investors in those companies, and the educational institutions that lead into the knowledge shaping them. And it's really about getting these entities to sign up to the Race to Zero, where they commit to particular science-based targets of what it means to be Paris-aligned, what it means to be committed to well below 2 degrees and at 1.5 degrees. Okay, what does it look like? Let's move to the next slide. Now, we know the role of electrification and how it really plays into decarbonization transport. So I chose not to replicate that today. But in COP28, we heard about the tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency target. And this image is from the International Energy Agency, published at COP28. And it shows the parts of activities that need to happen to double energy efficiency and remain Paris-aligned. And you can see in the columns that electrification is one of them, transport is the light green blue, and it's a small part. And if you look to the right corner, avoided demand, it's a box almost triple the size of electrification. Because when you travel less, or when you consolidate demand in bigger trucks or bigger ships, economies of scale, or move it from a plane to a more efficient railway system, this is when you really improve energy efficiency and you can be aligned with the IEA's net zero emissions scenario, the one shown on the most right. So the key message here is we know that more technical efficiency, better technology helps. We know that electrification powered by renewable helps, but we also need to think about how we can reduce demand to increase energy efficiency. Excellent. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot from the Science-Based Target Initiative. Now, to enter the race to zero, companies generally need to follow the guidance that they set, and they updated theirs for the land transport space just 2 months ago in March. And it really creates, I believe, a nice framework to understand where we are. Either we are a company that operates vehicles, an operator, or we get another operator to move our goods for us. And these are shipping companies. Either we're moving passengers or we're moving freight, sometimes by air or by ship, particularly for freight. Or we've got the automotive companies that manufacture the vehicles. Now, the automotive companies need to really focus on not just the emissions that come out of their tailpipes, and this is the WTW, well to wheel, the emissions that come from the usage, but also the emissions that come from the production. Polestar set a target to create the first carbon neutral vehicle by 2030 across its entire life cycle, from the raw critical material all the way to its end of life. And when we look at the activities, it's really about how much passengers or tons of freight we move for what distance, using which fuel economy. Good. Moving on to the next slide, please. We can see what a transport chain looks like. And this gets really arcane, really technical, but the SBTi cites the ISO standard 1483, which in itself is based on a framework called GLEC. But I really like it because it breaks the trip, be it the top figure one of a package, you know, the Amazon package that we order, or the latter one when we travel from one area across its entire chain. And this is where we really see the technologies we use, the trucks, the railways, the ships, but also the choices that we make. Do I drive or do I take a bike? But I can't take a bike if I have a bag and I'm traveling. Do I take the public transport? And the efficiency levels thereof. And this is how the emissions are quantified across it. This is what companies need to do as they measure their baselines and follow these standards to be compliant. Moving to the next slide. In the Champions team, we aggregated all of the different climate actions across all sectors, including the transport space. In this publication, I strongly recommended the 2030 climate solutions. And you can see in the figure on the right, the amount of entities by sector that are committed to these climate solutions. So if you've got more than 20% of companies creating cars, automotive companies committed to producing more than 80% zero emission vehicles by 2030, they're committed to the 1.5 degrees. And that's what this graph tells us. And maybe I'll end my presentation here, handing the floor back to Louise to take us through the Transport Action Guide and how it takes sometimes these complicated things, breaks them down into tangible steps for the transport actors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mohammed, for that. And also taking us through maybe the first step of the book there, the action guide that we have, and that's really you need to dissect and know what your transportation value chain looks like. So I'll be introducing now the transportation action guide. So who is this guide, or what is this guide for? It is for companies mainly, or anyone interested really, to look at their greenhouse gas emissions coming from the transportation that is done within the value chain or to and from an organization in any direction. It could be downstream or it could be upstream. It offers then practical steps to align the logistics and integrate this with a sustainability strategy and also any other strategy that needs to be aligned with. And it supports the wider transformation of the transportation sector. So it's not really only looking at your own transportation that you have, because more is needed. You need to look much broader than that, because we're all working in the same system. That's why we call it the wider transformation of the transportation sector. We need to have this collaboration in place. We need to have the system in place. We need to have the technical solutions in place in order to make it happen. And therefore, we need this collaboration. Who is it for? Really, I said this already, really anyone, but especially for companies looking at the transportation emissions. They could be for your own organization, for your company, but it is also for when you are working with suppliers and with customers. So both up and downstream, but also other partners that you should be working with when looking at transportation emissions. And I list here a few relevant stakeholders because I think that is so important, because smaller companies and larger companies work in different ways, but especially in the larger companies or in smaller, you can think of just the functions working with logistics or working with planning or working with supply or within sourcing and procurement or with sustainability. There's so many that need to be on the same level of understanding, knowing the common targets, sharing what you already know, and sharing competence within those functions. So getting everyone on board, then you have this guide, and it's quite a good one to get everyone on the same level here. This guide for transportation, it is connected to something we call the 1.5 business playbook. And I really want to state this because this is maybe our foremost resource from Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And it is a guide for how a company aligns with a 1.5 degree ambition, or how to make sure that your company is aligned with the climate action to the right level of science. So when working with transportation, this would target one part of this playbook, which is the pillar number 2 that you see here in blue, the second pillar, and that is for your emissions in the value chain. If you've seen this book, many of you have, then that's good. If you haven't, please give it a look. It's on our webpage, because it's maybe for you or for others that should get a little bit more understanding of how a company can work with climate action. And it's super simple, easy read. That's why I like it very much. You can get through it in half an hour and get a much better understanding for what is relevant for your organization. So as I already said, it's connected to pillar number 2. And here again, it says plan and take action to collaboratively reduce value chain emissions from transportation. And I really like the collaborative part here. And elaborating a little bit, it's collaboration within the organization that I already mentioned, up and downstream that I already mentioned too, but also with other partners and other stakeholders around you that also have transportation that you can be working together with. And we have 5 steps in this guide that are the most prominent steps. We try to make it really easy read and tangible for you to understand what is a good step for you. You may be in different steps of this process, but you will understand what is a good next step if you're stuck as well. And first of all, like Mohammed also touched upon, it's the assessment of the transportation in your value chain, what it looks like for your organization, and getting a little bit of the as-is situation and the background for your company and the context that you work within. Then it's securing company commitment And that is, as for any other project, very, very important. If you don't have the commitment, not only from management, but that is, of course, desperately necessary, but also from those that are going to work with this within your organization, you need to have that in place. Then reduce, replace, and rethink, the 3 R's. I know that Elisabeth, you're going to go in a little bit into that area in your part of the presentation. And that is really what you need to think about when reducing your emissions, is to reduce what you can and replace what you can and rethink to get even better solutions. Measure and evaluate results like any other project. And then also reporting on progress, and then basically getting to the good practices, listen around to what is out there, and then again assess what the result is and what your company can do to be even better. So really, it's a step-by-step guide for reducing emissions. And we will soon get into Elisabeth's part here, IKEA's ways of working. But the guide, I want to say, it's very much about showing that solutions are there. Companies need to start working with these solutions, because most companies, I hope that most of you already do have targets in place. Transportation emissions will most probably be a part of those emissions that you need to reduce. And there are possibilities to reduce them quicker than if your goal is for 2030. If you have targets for there, it is possible to reduce them quicker. There are solutions, and with IKEA and Scan Global Logistics, we want to give a few examples for how that has happened. So now over to you, Elisabeth.
Thank you so much, Louise. And hello, everyone. A pleasure to be here. So we can move to the first slide, please. Let's see if it works here. Yes. So I come from IKEA supply chain operations. So we are responsible for the transport and logistics globally of IKEA home furnishing products, from the suppliers to the warehouses and stores. And we do not have any own trucks or vessels or trains or anything. So all the emissions that we have from our transportation are scope 3 emissions. And if we move to the next one, so we are a big global shipper. We do about 1.7 million shipments a year, and we emit a substantial amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And we're also involved in the everyday working life of tens of thousands of drivers and seafarers and warehouse workers that in some way handle our home furnishing goods. And millions of people across the globe, as we know, are affected by the transport and logistics industry as such. For us, it gives us, of course, a big responsibility, a strong sense of purpose, but also an opportunity to influence. And if we move to the next one, so what we want to achieve in supply chain operations, the destination that we are aiming for is an IKEA goods flow serving people and protecting the environment, a clean and a fair goods flow. And by this, we mean that we are aiming for zero emission transportation and 100% renewable energy across our supply chain operations. And we also want to create a better everyday work life for the people moving and handling our goods. And we also want to contribute to a positive experience for people and communities that are connected to our goods flow. And if we move to the next one, to support us on this journey, we have joined COSEV, Cargo Owners for Zero Emission Vessels. We've committed to only ship our goods over the oceans on zero emission vessels by 2040. And we have also joined EV100 Plus committed to only truck our goods on 100% zero emission heavy duty trucks, electric or hydrogen, by 2040. And if we move to the next one, but we also have a very important milestone already now in 2030, where our target is to reduce the emissions from every transport we do by an average of minus 70% compared to the baseline year of 2017, and to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from our warehousing activities by 80%. And if we move to the next one, so 6 years to go to 2030. So it's just around the corner, and it is with this urgency that we work with decarbonizing transport and logistics in our supply chain. And if we move to the next one, just to get a perspective on how much is actually transportation of our whole complete IKEA supply chain and the carbon footprint. So as you can see, this slide shows, the emissions all the way from the materials that we use through production processes, transportation, the retail activities, the product use at home, and when they finally become waste. And as you can see, the product transportation is a bit more than 4% of the total IKEA footprint. It might seem small, but we are a big global shipper, and it is about 1 million tons of CO2 that we emit from the transportation part. And if we move to the next slide, you can see it here. And if we look at those 4% and this 1 million tons, approximately 40+% comes from the ocean shipping part, 50+ from the land part, and a smaller part from the logistics and the warehousing activities. So if we move to the next, how do we then practically work with this carbon footprint? Well, we work according to our decarb agenda, and that is what Louise was also mentioning now, the reduce, replace, and rethink agenda, where reduce is about increasing efficiency in everything we do, working with continuous improvements. And there is still such a big potential in increasing efficiency, both from a greenhouse gas reduction perspective, but also, of course, from a cost perspective. It's about fuel efficiency measures. It's about increasing equipment utilization, fill rates, optimizing the networks, integrate digital solutions, etc. It's about how can we do things more efficiently? How can we work smarter? How can we do things more affordable? And I'm not saying that everything can be done at a lower cost. There are, of course, need for investments to make the green zero emission transformation. But in almost every case, you can make things more efficient. So what I'm trying to say here is not just about keep doing what we do today and then switch to a new technology. In this transformation, it's also about opportunity to do things differently and better, and also to use less energy than we use today in the world. Replace is about replacing fossil fuels with alternatives, zero emission solutions, renewable energy, etc., and to also switch to intermodal solutions using rail, short sea, inland waterways. And by switching from a normal diesel truck to an intermodal solution, you cut the carbon emissions by approximately half. And here, we are also using biofuels that we see as an important measures in the short-term perspective to reduce emissions here and now, while we still, of course, are focusing on scaling up the zero emission solutions. So just an example, we're using biofuels in ocean shipping, and with the latest tender that we made, we will reduce the emission from our ocean shipping by almost 30%. And Rethink is about integrating innovative solutions into our supply chain, and not only innovative technologies and fuels, but also innovative collaborations across the supply chain. And if we move to the next one, I just explained this is how we work, and we also know that it is working. And since 2017, which is our baseline year, we have made a lot of progress. So every shipment we have, transport shipment, is on average, they have 25% less greenhouse gas emissions. And if we move to the next one, we also, an important focus areas here is that we are really focusing on putting as much as we can on rail, short sea, and barge. And we now have more than 50% of our ton kilometers on land on intermodal solutions. And this is a strong contributor to our greenhouse gas reduction. Not only then does it cut the emissions by half, but also brings about other benefits that we take trucks off the road and put it on rail and on short sea. Means less trucks on the roads, less congestions, also better work-life balance for drivers that do not need to make the longest stretches on the roads. And shorter pre and on carriage also open up possibilities for electrification. Moving to the next one, also we have now 91% renewable electricity in our logistics units, our warehousing units. And we work closely together with our service providers to identify opportunities and implement ways of working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And every day we collect a lot of good examples on collaborations with our service providers across the globe. And this is to inspire and engage and share best practices. And you can scan this code here and you will take you to this good examples or the decarb catalog. Because it is very simple. We will not reach our targets if the partners we work are not sharing this journey. So collaboration is really, really key. And if we move to the last slide here, is that climate challenge, it is complex. It cannot be solved by individual companies. So collaboration is key. And we are many different stakeholders across the value chain of transportation. And we're all part of the solution to the climate challenge in transportation. And we all sit with different pieces of this solution. So we need to work together and we need to co-create the solution. We need to share and learn from each other to reach the common goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth. Collaboration is really key. And thank you for also pointing that out again. And I know that, Martin, you will be talking a little bit about that in one way or the other. And I hand over to you from Scan Global Logistics way of working.
Thank you, Louise. And thanks to Elisabeth for the strong presentation. Impressive work with the plan and the reductions already made. So a strong company in the Exponential Roadmap Initiative partnership. I want to talk a little bit about how we work with decarbonization in the logistics sector. Let's take the next slide. And as a global freight forwarder, we have no assets, so no planes, no ships, no trucks. So we manage the transportation needs for our customers through all these different transport modes: air freight, ocean, rail, road, warehousing, heavy lift projects, and fulfillment and distribution. But it's not enough to be an expert within transportation and logistics anymore. We also need to be experts in how to decarbonize and reduce the emissions from transportation. Let's take the next one. So what we have done is create a concept for companies who wants to reduce emissions, and we share our emissions with all the companies. So we need to help them to decarbonize. And with this concept, we aim to reduce the emissions from transportation with 50 to 100%, which is solutions that are already available now. So we start with providing a full emission overview, full transparency on trade lanes down to transport modes and transport legs. We identify together with the company the reduction opportunities across transport modes, logistics setup, fuel type optimization, and then we set a target together and develop the plan and start implementing the reductions. Let's take the next one. Some solutions will be around logistics setup. Some solutions will be around, using biofuel in air freight, ocean freight, trucking that can reduce heavily the emissions. And one example of a logistics setup is also if you're flying from Asia to Europe or from Europe to Asia. If you use an intermodal sea air solution, you can save up to 50% of the CO2 by sailing to Dubai and flying it into Europe, or the other way around. You will avoid the Red Sea issues, and at the same time, with a little more transit time, you will save up to 50% of the CO2. Let's take the next one. If we look into the different transport modes, we try to benchmark them. Then if we go from air freight to an air-ocean intermodal solution, we'll save 50% of the CO2. Going from air-ocean to a road solution will be a decrease of 89% of the CO2, and from road to rail, 51%, rail to ocean, 53%. But if you go directly from air freight to ocean freight, you're able to reduce the CO2 with 98%. So this is very important if you try to work with logistic solutions. If you have to stay in air freight, we have solutions for that. We can decrease it with biofuel, but also working with the setup. Let's take the next one. This example is on how you can work with reductions and getting the needed overview. In this example, a company had 34% ocean full load containers, 3% ocean less than container loads, and 64% air freight. We try to give a good overview of the different regions, how the split of the transport modes and the trade lane was actual. Let's take the next one. We try to give a good overview of their different trade lanes and the emissions per trade lane. And in this example, you can see that the Sweden-China, Germany to China, but also China to India was the highest emitting trade lanes on air freight. And 40% was Europe to Asia, the emissions. We take the next one. On the ocean freight, we could see that China to Mexico, China to US, but also Germany to China was the highest emitting trade lanes on ocean freight. And from there, if we take the next slide, we are able to work with the different solutions. So here we have 6 solutions: the sea air combo, low carbon modes, low emission fuels, regional setup, hubs, pre and post carriage, and road solutions. And within the different transport mode, we are able to reduce from 50 to 100% already now. So with this example and this current logistic setup, we are able to use 5 of the solutions. Go to the next. Then we create a roadmap to decrease the CO2. So in this roadmap, the company has a full overview on behalf of the trade lane analysis on how they can reduce. If they use the sea air combo, in this case from Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Belgium to Asia, it could reduce with 13,000 tons of CO2 with less cost, but more transit time. We are able to go from air freight to ocean freight to low carbon mode, from Asia to rest of the world, US to rest of the world, which gave us 11,000 tons of CO2 reduction. Less cost, more transit time. We could implement the electric trucks on main center to Hamburg, main center to Antwerp, which gave us 2,100 tons of CO2 reduction. Electric trucks are still a little more expensive, but the transit time with the fossil truck is the same. Then we could use 20% of the existing ocean freight for ocean biofuel, which is 100% reduction, which gave us 5,700 tons of CO2 reduction. More cost because the biofuel is a premium you pay on top of the freight rate, but the transit time is the same. We use 5% of sustainable aviation fuel for the air freight, which is 80% reduction, which gave us 2,000 tons of CO2. A premium on top of the freight rate, but the same transit time. So in this case, it's a 30% reduction over 3 years with same cost, but more transit time. Companies can shuffle around these solutions, use more or less of one solution and apply more or less biofuel. But it's important to know that if you do only 10% a year, this is manageable. But if you start too late, then it can take big investments, business model changes. So the important part is that you can slice the elephant and you can use solutions and also create a very visible roadmap on how to achieve your targets. Next, please. So this is the whole idea with what we do. We talk with companies around achieving the 50% reduction in 2030 that we are committed to in the partnership with all the global companies. And this will, of course, trickle down to all the suppliers, and we can support all the companies. So you need to do around 10% every year to reach the 50% reduction. If you wait 1 year, it will be harder. If you wait 2 years, it can require higher investments. If you wait 3 years, it will be hard to reach the target. You cannot do the hockey stick method the last year and save all the emissions. So we need to start now. That is the message that we have. And it's important also to reach out. If you want to collaborate in partnerships, you can reach out to Louise in the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And then we will try to work together with other companies and to look into the same transport modes. If you have the same transport lanes as well, then there are solutions that you can apply. So this was, just an example on how to work with creating visibility, transparency, making a roadmap, and then trying to reach the target. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. Very, very interesting and very valuable, I think, for those that are thinking about their transportation in their value chains, because this is basically how you could structure it in order to see where and what can be reduced and how. And also interesting comparison there between transit time and costs as well. Transit time will demand a little bit more planning between the customers and yourselves and the logistics partner.
Yes.
So I think that was the last part of the presentation. And thank you, Martin, for also saying that if you want to collaborate on this, you can write to myself, addressing it to myself, Louise. You can write to hello@exponentialroadmap.org. And just in order to get that collaboration part in place to see if there is something that can be done together. So reach out to me, please. And now we're getting to the panel discussion. Excellent. So I'll pause the sharing now. And I'll make sure I see everyone in the panel here. And I'll start with reaching out to you, Mohammed. Do you see that we're moving in the right direction? And you also see blockers. What are the main ones?
So we're definitely moving in the right direction. There is no doubt about that. The direction is down with emissions and adopting more of the climate solutions. I think that the real question is the speed thereof. And the second question would be the speed thereof in a geographically distributed way, and how can the top companies, and I believe that we just heard 2 presentations from 2 top companies, ensure that they don't remain just the top in this collective problem, because this is where we need the solutions to really scale across geographies. And this is, for instance, where the climate solutions come in. If we look at the adoption of SAF that Martin mentioned, sustainable aviation fuel, currently the IKEA set a target that it is approximately 5% reduction in CO2 due to SAF use by 2030. But if we look at the science-based trajectories, we need to be somewhere between 13 to 15%, so much more ambitious. And here my question then becomes, are we able in our operations in SCAN to aim for a 13 to 15% SAF use by 2030 to the customers. And it's also about ensuring that the customers who paid sometimes premiums for that are not disincentivized vis-a-vis others. And this is really the challenge. I think it's the same also for IKEA. I'm sitting on an IKEA chair in Egypt, you know, like your reach is absolutely global. Are we going to see the same mandates put on the transport suppliers in the EMDE markets? Because there it can be an absolute game changer. And we can see this in the current reports of the Global Electric Vehicle Outlook. We have leading markets, the EU, the US, China, but we also have following markets, Africa, Southeast Asia. And this is where I'd really push to see the same stories in the next year coming from those amazing companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. And then you also connected there to what Martin said about starting now versus starting later. And starting now is going to make it a little bit easier for you with all the, first of all, preparations and finding solutions, finding the areas to work with, but also starting with the reductions. Better start now than later. So I will pose my next question to Elisabeth. So IKEA has done tremendous work when it comes to reducing emissions there for transportation. What do you see are the key elements for deploying and scaling sustainable transportation solutions successfully?
Thank you, Louise, for the question. For us, what has been very important, I believe, is that we've the whole time been working in two parallel tracks. And that is that one track is to have a very fact-based approach. And the second track, the parallel track, is to really work on engaging, inspire, and empower people to take on the agenda and make it an integrated part of their business assignment. So for us, the fact-based track has really been about understanding our emissions. How much do we emit? Having detailed facts on this to understand the magnitudes and what is big and what is small, and how big are the transport emissions in comparison to other types of emissions, etc. And then you can create the framework around it and have a systematic approach with the target setting, the KPIs, the reporting structure, the follow-ups, etc., to really ensure the integration into the business agenda. And the second track about the engagement and empowerment is really to get people on board wanting to move this agenda, to understand how to make an impact. And I believe that people overall are very interested in sustainability, and they really want to be part of making a positive impact, which is a really great starting point. So it's about channeling this positive energy into actions to reduce the emissions from transportation. And this is where we then have applied this reduce, replace, rethink approach that can be used as a practical and quite easy compass on how to navigate. And then also, I think it's important to communicate around the journey, to share how the journey is going and what has been achieved, and also to celebrate small successes along the way, because it's a marathon that we are on to tackle the climate challenge. And it's important to keep the motivation and spirit up and to celebrate that we can actually do a lot. It's urgent, but it's also doable.
Thank you, Elisabeth. And that's also exactly what you're doing now. You're being very inspiring so that people understand that things can be done and they can be done now. And it has been, there has been a lot of progress already in this area when you set your mind to it. And also engaging the people within the organization is very important. That's also why we have this guide, because sometimes it's not easy to know how to integrate this to your work because you don't know what steps to take. And that's also where this guide comes in. And I direct the question to Martin.
Yes.
And I would want to ask your message out to companies, what would that be from you and from Scan Global Logistics?
I would very simple start saying, just start measuring. If you have an overview of your emissions on your different trade lanes, on your different transport modes, then there are solutions. And we will also very much like to push for collective courage, that you'd start out doing some pilots on the different transport modes, get some learnings, but then maybe go into collaboration with others to scale the solutions. It's okay to have an electric truck, it's okay to have some biofuel, but if we need really to scale this, we know the global supply chains, we know the global trade lanes, so a lot of companies have the trade lanes, the same trade lanes, so they can work together on the transportation part. And maybe we can build, green corridors, green lanes together. That could be hard alone. But start measuring and reach out if you need support to have full transparency on your emissions, and also get your reduction roadmap up and running, so it's visible for the stakeholders, the board, the transportation departments, the operation, the supply chain people, so they can see, this is achievable. It's not something that requires a lot of effort. You can do it, and reach out and to see, if you need support or help. But this is definitely, as Elisabeth also is saying, possible to get going already now.
It is, Martin, and please don't forget to ask questions. Here we have some of the most ambitious and most knowledgeable within the area of transportation, so don't forget to ask questions here in the chat. I have one question, and that is, if the webinar is recorded, and yes, it is, it will be on our webpage for Exponential Roadmap Initiative. You can find it there shortly. And we have a very long question here. Give me a moment, and give us a moment, and we'll read it through.
I can maybe take the short question. What solutions does IKEA have in North America on Scope 3? Well, we are working, started work with electric drayage. We have some solutions in place in the Port of LA and Long Beach, and also up in Canada. So this is something that we are really looking into, how we can scale that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And also, panelists, if there is anything more that you would like to point out or say, just go for it as well. I'm reading through this question now.
Maybe I can.
Yep, go for it, Martin.
If we look at the geopolitical situations, but also previously the pandemic, we saw a lot of disruption in the supply chain. And of course, if you are delivering to orders, this can really interrupt the supply chain and sometimes also make the factories stand still. If you change the logistics setup, then you could maybe start using a bonded warehouse in the region where you have to distribute. So instead of going fast by orders all the way from where you produce it to your market, then you can go slowly with ocean freight to a bonded warehouse and then distribute faster in the region. This will also be, besides having a huge decrease on the CO2, it will also make the setup more resilient because you have a buffer near your market. So you can still deliver even through huge disruptions in the supply chain. So this near market hub could also be a good idea to consider in a logistics setup. So it's more resilient, go there slowly with less cost, less CO2, but still able to deliver fast in the region. So that was my take on this longer question.
Thank you so much, Martin. And I think now we want to wrap it up, and I want to thank the panelists, the speakers that we have here today. We have Elisabeth from IKEA, Martin from Scan Global Logistics, and Mohammed from Climate Champions team. And what we've been talking about is the Transportation Action Guide that explains how companies can work with reducing transportation emissions, and with these examples of how it is actually possible and the next steps of what companies can do in order to work with it. We have been hearing about innovation and creative approaches. We've been hearing about collaboration and how important it is, and that there are solutions already now. We should not stay in the same way of thinking. We need to think in new ways to make this work, and also about how planning will support you when it comes to transit time, which, as Martin talked about, may be extended in the example that was shown. However, the cost was not extended. But with better planning, you will be able to make your deadlines if that is possible for you. And also starting now, which is so very important. And with that, I want to end this seminar. We are almost on the hour. So thank you so much, everyone who participated speaking, and you who listened, and get back to me at hello@Exponential Roadmap Initiative. hello@exponentialroadmap.org. You can reach out to me if there are any questions. So thank you so much, and we'll be closing the webinar now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.